Asyle, Tropical Island Survival. Week 27, Day 1. As I drifted off last night, I thought about the week ahead. Now that I've gotten the damage under control, I can start focusing on some actual defenses. I got up, checked the horizon, and did my morning chores. 8 plates in, and the dynamo still doesn't seem to be electroblading much faster. There was definitely something wrong with my assumptions about how much energy the dynamo could convert into electricity, or how much flux could be stored in the iron sheets. The only thing I can think of to make it plate faster is to turn the dynamo itself faster. I probably need to build a dedicated place for it anyway, so I don't have to keep removing it from the lathe every time I want to use the lathe. I put that on my to-do list, but for today, I had a few other ideas for things I needed to do to make the base more defensible. The first thing I did was sit myself down and start making a plan. As mentioned, I want to make myself a suit of armor to protect myself from small arms fire, if worst comes to worst. I have the materials for that now, so all I have to do is build it. That's the worst case scenario, however, and I'd prefer to either prevent them from coming into my base in the first place, or have a remote means of repelling them, as it's occurred to me that blowing up the bunker may not be enough. There's nothing to stop them from coming after me for revenge if I do, or deciding to kill me and use one of my buildings as a replacement stash. They could even just hide their drugs in a hole like buried treasure and come after me to make sure that I never interfere with their business again. Ultimately, better to leave the bunker intact, though I also feel it's important to leave them a message that I'm not to be trifled with, so that's another task to add to my list. If they do come after me, though, I'm going to need a way to defend myself, and as mad and scared as I am, I still don't want to actually hurt or kill anyone. If that's the path I want to take, then I'll need to design weapons that attack their senses. This is something I gave a fair amount of thought to before coming to the island, concluding that a nearly perfect non-lethal weapon would be a device that makes a loud, powerful sound that forces people to cover their ears. You can't shoot someone if your hands are too busy covering your ears to aim a gun. The police and military sometimes use devices called parametric acoustic arrays to create powerful cones of high-intensity sound for crowd control. Unlike a regular speaker, which sends sound in all directions, this machine is able to focus most of the sound waves along a straight path, which is why it's sometimes called an audio spotlight. The way it works is that the array is made of a bunch of little speakers that are vibrating at frequencies above the range of human hearing, but each at a slightly different frequency and phase from the others. This causes the sound waves created by each speaker to interfere with the others, adding together in some places around the array, and canceling each other out in others, which is how it makes sure the sound is just in front of the array. And even though the sound waves from each individual speaker are too high for the human ear to hear, the way they interfere can cause them to create what's called a beat frequency in musical terms, where the waves add together at the one frequency they have in common, turning a low-energy, high-frequency sound into a high-energy, low-frequency sound that you can hear. At first, I thought about making something like a giant flute or whistle, or a whole bunch of whistles tied together, but there'd be no way to control their phases. Then it occurred to me, why not make the real thing? It uses piezoelectric crystals, which I can make from Rochelle salt. I have a larger power source now, and I could control their phases if I could make a small enough circuit board of electrolytic transistors. I put this on my to-do list. The next sense I could disrupt is vision. Again, you can't shoot what you can't see. In the absence of onions or the like, I didn't think I could make something like a tear gas, and I wasn't sure where I'd get magnesium or the like to make a flashbang. However, if the solar tower is working, maybe I could add a turret of some kind to the top of it to redirect the sunlight into a bright, concentrated beam that could blind anyone trying to look at me, kind of like I used when aligning the periscope lenses. The beam would probably never get hot enough to burn them, even if the kiln is designed to do the very same thing. Again, the Mythbusters couldn't do it with 10 times as many mirrors. But it might also be hot and uncomfortable. To do this, I'll need more silver, which I should probably get more of anyway. Finally, if worst comes to worst and I don't have any other options, I'm going to need a way to kill them, but only if it's them or me. Honestly, a crossbow would probably be adequate and relatively easy to make, but I think another important factor here is going to be intimidation. From what I've seen, they're only packing handguns, and while it could invite escalation in armaments, a bigger gun would encourage them to back off and avoid messing with me. Besides, wearing armor would do that anyway if they were intent on hurting me. Some kind of shotgun seems to me to be the best option for several reasons. First of all, it has utility beyond self-defense, though there's nothing I really need to hunt on this island. Secondly, the barrel and ammo are going to be easier to make than something like a rifle or a submachine gun, which are usually rifled, meaning they have a spiral groove on the inside of the barrel to make the bullets spin as they fly out, which causes them to fly straighter. Shotguns, on the other hand, shoot a spray of small lead spheres in a relatively wide spread, so they don't need to be gyro-stabilized. This is one thing that makes them so useful for hunting birds, but would also be helpful if I needed to hit several targets at once, unfortunately. The width of the spread depends on the length of the barrel. The lead shot would also be easy to cast, so I've decided that's what I'm going to go for. With a plan in place, I'm going to need a few things, mostly iron and lead for the shotgun, silver for the solar beam, and Rochelle salt and copper for the circuits in the parametric array. That means I'm going to need more metals, which means more mining, so I'll probably spend most of this week working on that, starting with finishing up the automation of the explosives manufacturing machine. I got some rubber for a rubber band, one of my old ungrooved records for a mass, and built a clock mechanism into the explosives machine, similar to the timer I built for the gramophone. This took a couple of hours, and when I was done, as mentioned, I had plenty of nitric acid and creosote oil stockpiled to start testing it with. Once the machine was set up, I left it to slowly mix the explosives while I installed the new nitric acid bubbler in the lab. It helped having the pump situated at the top of the machine, because it meant I didn't need as long a stick to connect it to the Van de Graaff rollers providing the mechanical power. Around that time, I had lunch, and besides prepping the nitrocellulose fuses and switching out the ingredients in the explosives machine every now and then, there wasn't a lot I could do today. One thing I could do, though, was finish building that armor. I started by cutting and hemming my coarse bamboo mesh into the proper shapes, mostly a large tunic to protect my upper body, pads to protect my legs and arms, and something I could drape over my basket hat to make a helmet. Next, I used some cord to start tying the ceramic tiles to the mesh, such that they overlapped but remained flexible. This is called lamellar armor. I ended up making 2 layers of mesh and plates, one over the other, so that any bullets that get through one layer would probably be caught by the other. The final result strongly resembled traditional samurai armor, minus the artistic flourishes, which I think is cool, but I found a major problem still remaining with the design, namely that it is very heavy, though what should I have expected for basically trying to wear the contents of a china cabinet? With this, there's not going to be a lot I can do but stand there and take hits, which is not ideal. But I'm out of time for today, so I'll leave that problem for solving tomorrow. By that time, the explosives were done, and I needed to find a place in the caverns to set and seal them so I can start mining tomorrow. I didn't really have a spot in mind, as most of the nearby veins of copper I've already mined out. There was still plenty of iron pyrite though, so I spent some time drilling before placing my explosives and sealing them in for the night. Week 27, Day 2. When I was done with my morning chores, I headed down to the caves to set off the explosives, like old times. Fortunately, this one went off without a hitch, and I collected the ore, drilled a spot for tomorrow's blast, and started the ore grinder when I got back to base. I had lunch and started the next round of explosives before removing the latest plate from the electrolysis cell and installing it in the dynamo. This didn't leave me a lot of time at the end of the day to devise a solution for my heavy samurai armor. Fortunately for me, though, I didn't need a lot of time to think about it, because I already had something in mind. I once designed a D&D character for fun who built themselves an articulated wooden frame that could function as a sort of primitive, powered exoskeleton. Mostly, it was to give them increased load-bearing capacity, but that's exactly what I need right now, and the same design principles should still apply. I got some bamboo and cut several pieces to more or less match the length of my leg bones. I trimmed the ends so that they had a nice curve to them. This was so that, where they come together, they would create a rolling joint, like the human knee, but I left enough on one side exposed so that it would create a sort of catch to keep the knee joint from bending backwards, like a kneecap. A little cord was all I needed to hold them together, functioning similarly to tendons. I then took some short bamboo segments and tied them together to make a sort of shoe base for the legs of my exoskeleton to connect to and articulate off of. The positioning of the ankle joint couldn't perfectly match mine, but it should be good enough to distribute the weight of the armor and prevent any hyperextension of my ankles if I misstep. Unfortunately, that was all I had time for today, before setting up the next round of explosives and going to bed. I found that I'd run out of journaling paper, but because I'm going to be so busy this week, I just took some extra pages from the blank books I had waiting to be filled. Week 27, Day 3. I did my morning chores as usual, and set off the next round of explosives. Again, there were fortunately no problems, and I set the ore grinding and had lunch before starting a new batch. Once that was going, I could finally get back to the exoskeleton project, but again, I didn't have a lot of time today to get much done with it. So to give myself a little extra time in the future, I prepared a quick and dirty mechanism to let me prepare the fuses a little faster, namely a bamboo trough I could fill with nitric acid and lay the thread lengthwise down it, so I could make a whole batch more or less automatically. I'll also have a little more time after today, because I finished putting the last plate in the dynamo, at least for a while. Continuing with the exoskeleton, I bent some bamboo into arches and connected them to the leg segments to make a sort of hip joint or pelvic girdle. This part was a bit tricky though, because I couldn't really have all the weight bearing down on the legs here, otherwise the weight bearing members would need to be attached to my sides, which would limit my mobility. I preferred the idea of the weight bearing members being around my back, which would provide additional protection there, but would also mean that the application of downward force to the legs would be off-center from them, creating an inevitable torque on the hip joints. My solution was to cut some bamboo into thick strips to function like a sort of bow. In this case, when connected to the hip frame and legs of the exoskeleton, they applied a counter torque when deflected, keeping the frame balanced while still allowing me a good amount of flexibility. I built a similar set of springs for the knee and ankle joints, which made the suit stiff but ultimately completely self-supporting, without me having to exert a great deal of muscular effort to hold it up or move around. Of course, this was actually easier when I was wearing the heavy armor to make the springs compress, and while I was wearing it, the springs allowed me to run around with a sort of bouncy gait, where I only had to expend enough energy to maintain the oscillation between the springs and the weight of the armor, which is a critical feature in the event that I actually have to move around while wearing this thing. Next, I attached the hip frame to several shorter segments of bamboo strapped together side to side, like a rope bridge, or like the feet I made for the exoskeleton. However, in this case, they formed a flexible spine that was able to bend up and down, and even twist a little. I added some pegs to them to keep them from hyperextending backwards, which could break my back if I became overloaded. However, there was nothing to keep it from bending all the way forward either, and keep me from pulling my weight back up. So I made some quick and dirty torsion springs attached to the cords running up and down the spine to provide a force to pull it back into an upright position if bent, while simultaneously not taking up a lot of space on the frame. That was all I had time to make, and just barely, before it began getting dark and I needed to place the next round of explosives before bed. Week 27, Day 4. I did my morning chores and blasted another hole in the caves. Surely my luck with the reliability of the explosives can't last much longer. I brought the ore back to base, started grinding, had lunch, and started the next round of explosives. Thanks to that fuse trough, I had just about 1 extra hour today to work on the exoskeleton. I bent some bamboo to make a frame that I could attach to the spine and drape my armor over. Mostly a pair of rings for my arms to stick through and some cross braces. The problem with this design by itself, however, was that the armor wasn't easy to get into, so I had to stop and make some adjustments. Firstly, I made a little door on the front of the torso frame of the exoskeleton that I could lift up and down to make getting in and out easy. And secondly, I re-hemmed the armor so that it could open and close with this hatch. Again, because the armor was heavy, I added some springs to make it easier to lift the hatch and some latches to hold it in place when closed. At that point, most of the essential features of the exoskeleton were finished, and I could probably have stopped, but I saw no point in taking half measures, so I prepared some bamboo rods to act as arm supports, similarly to the ones I built for the legs, tying them into the torso frame and supporting them with springs. It wasn't like I would need a lot of help holding my arms up or anything, but I figured that, if I fell down while I was wearing this armor, I might not be able to get back up without assistance. In a way, the springs in the arms will allow me to double their strength, as the springs will store energy from one set of arm muscles, pulling them into a deflected position, which will be released and added to the energy provided by my other set of arm muscles when I want to extend my arms again. This will make it easier for me to roll over or push myself back to my feet if I find myself on the ground while wearing this. I couldn't help playing around with it a little though, and practiced throwing some super punches, though it also occurred to me that this frame would help me carry heavy loads around easily if I needed to. With that done, I set the next round of explosives for tomorrow morning, and went to bed. Week 27, Day 5. I decided to take my armor with me to the caves after my morning chores, not only as a field test, but also because it occurred to me that it would function effectively as a bomb suit if anything went wrong. It was a good thing I did, because, almost as expected, my luck ran out and the bomb misfired. So I waited a while before carefully going in and resetting the fuse. The armor itself was relatively easy to run around in, but not very maneuverable, and it made me feel kind of clumsy, so I had to walk carefully, especially on the uneven ground in the lava tubes. I figured I had enough iron at this point, so I switched tact and set up my next drill hole near some galena so I could start collecting lead, before heading back to base for a late lunch. I got the ore grinding and the explosives percolating before making some more tweaks to the armor. Again, there was no point in half measures, so I made some additions to the helmet area to connect it directly to the rest of the frame and limit the joints to prevent unexpected hyperextension of the neck, if, for example, I find myself landing on my head for some reason. Kind of like the sea collars I was trained with at the fire department back home. Finally, to prevent any sort of crushing damage from occurring, I bent some bamboo to form little cages connected to the arms and legs of the exoskeleton, though the latter required some little doors to let me get in and out easily. These will also create more convenient places for me to mount the armor to it, but that tweak will have to wait until tomorrow. Week 27, Day 6. After my chores, I headed back down to the caves and had another misfire before I got the explosives to go off. I'm concerned that I don't seem to be quite as afraid of the explosives now as I used to, just annoyed with them. I made a mental note to adjust this mode of thinking for my safety. I set the ore grinding again and had a late lunch. At least I didn't need to make any more explosives, so I had the rest of the day more or less to myself. With all the scraps left over from working on the exoskeleton this week, I decided to start on another round of paper for my journals and books to make up for the deficit earlier this week. While I waited for the fibers to soak, I made a few final adjustments to the armor, recutting, rehemming, and binding certain pieces so they fit directly onto the exoskeleton frame, less likely to flop around, catch on things, or make noise that way, though I did leave a bit of a skirt around the hip area, because it was just an easier way to keep that area both covered and flexible. I also added the remainder of the cloth I had stockpiled to create a quilted layer underneath the main armor plating, as a last-ditch effort to insulate the suit from gunshots or explosions. Now that it's finished, it's quite impressive and frankly a bit imposing, which I like. At the end of the day, I squeezed my wood pulp into paper and left it to dry overnight. Week 27, Day 7. It's Sabbath, so after my morning chores, I transcribed my Bible recordings and listened to the sermon on the radio. It was about forgiveness and loving your enemies and stuff, but I feel like I'm kind of ahead of the game on that one, by changing my mind about blowing up the bunker. Even though I was supposed to be taking it easy today, I couldn't help feeling a little antsy, as I've got one more week till the end of the month, and maybe 2 weeks before the smugglers will probably come back. I needed to relax, so I spent the rest of the day making another program for the music machine, though I was nervous about it being broken again. I also had to keep stopping to make adjustments, because it still didn't sound quite right. My growing anxieties seemed to be reflected in the musical number I chose to program into the machine, Last Dungeon by Professor Sakamoto, and in a way, it helped me process it a little. Before the day ended, however, I was still thinking a bit about the sermon from this morning. I decided it would be a good idea to at least let the smugglers know that I didn't mean them any trouble, and just wanted to be left in peace. Because I was in a bit of a hurry, I simply found some rocks with smooth surfaces on them, and drew on them with lime paste, charcoal, or whatever pigments seemed to stick. Nuclear non-proliferation symbols, doves, handshakes, every symbol for peace that I could think of. I then ran over to the bunker and still somewhat timidly left the stones at the doorstep before running back to base and getting ready for bed. Nobody knew who I was till I put on the blooper reels. Once the machine was set up, I left it to slowly mix the explosives while I installed the new nitric acid bubbler in the workshop. Should that be in the workshop or the lab? It has to be in the lab. My mistake. I'll have to pause for edits. Unpause! I started by cutting and hamming. Yeah, really hamming it up in here. Oink oink. We're functioning similarly to some ligaments or tendons. Namely, a bamboo trough I could fill with nitric acid and lay the thread lengthwise down it so I could make. Okay. Namely, a bamboo trough I could fill with nitric acid and lay the thread. Continuing with the exoskeleton, I bent some bamboo into arches and connected them to the leg segments to make a sort of hip joint. That should probably be more like a pelvic girdle or something. I'm going to pause and rewrite that. Creating an innervable Turk, which made the stoof. Next, I attached the hip frame to several shorter segments of bamboo strapped together side by side, like I'm. There's got to be a better way to describe that. Hold on. As the springs will store energy from one set of arm muscles to put them in a deflected position in the first place, which can then be added to the other set of arm muscles when I want to extend my arm again. Okay, I just want to fix that little bit about the arms because it was confusing. Here we go. So I switched tact. Hey there, thanks for listening all the way to the end. It's amazing what you can build in a cave with a box of scraps, but they say the best defense is a good offense. So, if you want to see what I make next week, you can press the subscribe and bell buttons to get notified as soon as I'm done installing the chrome rims. Now, I'm obviously no Tony Stark, but it would really help me out, more than anything else, if you could share this video with someone who you think would enjoy it. And since you apparently enjoyed it enough to watch it this long, you can press the like button to say so. There's also a dislike button you can press if you didn't like it, but I really don't see the point, because this time I'm ready for it. You can't hurt me in here. I'm invincible! Who am I kidding? Also, if you'd like to share some of your own stories and perspectives on the episode, maybe share your favorite fictional robot suits or powered exoskeletons, feel free to share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear them, and I'm always open to suggestions and corrections. Personally, I have a soft spot for the power armor from Fallout 4. That said, thanks again for listening, and hope to see you here again next week.